Okay, so welcome to our My Moon Power Musing. And today we're joined by Gulietta Durante. And Gulietta, I'm so excited to be talking to you today. We're going to be talking on the topic of hormones. And Gulietta is a menstrual cycle nutritionist, and you also have a podcast called Femme Powered Podcast as well. So you talk about all things menstrual cycle, and you do that with Natalie K. Martin as well, don't you? And Natalie was on the Musings as well already. So thank you so much. Oh my God, I'm just so looking forward to this conversation. So how did you get started in this work, and what was your entry into it all?
Gosh, I think, well, my entry was first of all into nutrition, and then it developed into like female health, reproductive health. And I think I started off my sort of professional life as a translator, which I loved, but it was a little bit lonely, a little bit isolating. And this was way before the days of working from home. So I felt like I was the only person who worked from home. Um, and then I went away on a big trip to Brazil and Argentina. And when I came back to London, I was like, I'm not feeling this, really not feeling it. Went into my local health food store, family run, and they were like, oh, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. And the owner, he was like, well, actually, we need someone. Do you want to come and work here? Just as a little stopgap. And I was like, yes, I do, actually. And I'd always loved food, but it was that kind of like working with food at that, seeing the therapeutic sort of like applications of food, and just loving the conversations I was coming into all the time, and people asking me questions about supplements. And I was like, right, this is it. And so I went and I went back to university and I did my degree in nutritional therapy, which I loved. And then I suppose it's like weaving in my own experience, my own hormonal experiences, with then developing an interest in wanting to help other people with hormonal issues. And I think for me, the really big shift came like sort of like mid-30s. My PMS started getting really, really bad. I knew there was something going on, but I didn't know what it was. So I went to the GP. GP was like, there's nothing wrong with you, go on the pill. And I'd been on the pill many, many years ago, turned me into a complete nutcase. And I just wasn't prepared to do that. So I was like, okay. So then I had to go private and do all sorts of things because I knew there was something there. I did a scan and I actually had fibroids, which are
Mm.
tiny little growths in sort of like the womb. They're not cancerous, but they can cause a lot of issues. So I went back to the doctor and I was like, okay, I have fibroids. And she looked at my results and she was like, no, 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 you don't really have enough for a diagnosis. And I was just like, but they're causing me all these problems, like really, really heavy periods and very bad PMS. And again, the solution was, well, I've told you already, go on the pills. So I was like, right, okay. So I said to her, I'm going to try and support myself through nutrition. And she actually said, well, don't be ridiculous because you can't do anything with nutrition and hormones. And obviously, there's nothing like being told, don't
Mhm.
be ridiculous, to like really galvanize you and really wind you up and really
Yeah.
motivate you. And I was like, right, okay. So that's really when it started really going deeper into women's health. I started learning a lot about the conditions like, polycystic ovaries, endometriosis, fibroids, and really learning how nutrition and food could support these conditions. I then started doing more like deeper testing because one of the things I find is you go to the GP, you do some tests and you get told there's nothing wrong with you, but
Mm.
you clearly know that there is an imbalance. And so I started looking at different types of testing that they're not black or white, they're more like nuanced, and they will show you
Mhm.
like a greater sort of like bird's eye view of what's happening with your hormones. So I did that. And I loved doing all of that. But the missing piece was I had a lot of clients who'd be like, oh, I've got bad PMS. I feel a bit rubbish at this time of the month. I've got these problems. And I was trying to get them to feel the same every day. And that
Mhm.
wasn't working, you know.
Yeah, totally.
They would come back and they'd be like, yeah, I felt pretty good here, but I still had this, like, I don't know, slightly low mood or whatever. So I'd be like, gosh, what am I doing wrong? Why can't I get these women to feel the same every day? And that's when, luckily, I came across the concept of cycle syncing, working with our menstrual cycles, as in all the different phases of the cycle. I know that's a big part of what you do as well. And that was really what changed everything for me, because I was no longer trying to fit the classic, round peg into a square hole. We were then trying to optimize everyone's experience of the different phases of the cycle.
Mm.
I started doing that with myself, and it was just like life changing, because I was no longer fighting against my body all the time and being like, oh, why don't I have great energy every day? Why don't I want to smash my goals and blah, blah, blah every day? Well, clearly, because my hormones are not made that way. um,
Oh, I know the feeling so well.
it's crazy, isn't it? Once you discover this moment of discovery, I still remember it. I was on a plane coming back from Greece quite a few years ago, and I was reading a book called Woman Code by Elisa Vitti, and she was the first person I'd ever really heard this kind of take from. And I was just like, it was one of these late night flights. Everybody else was asleep and I had the light on, and I was just like, and I read the whole thing in on the flight, because I was like, when something resonates so deeply and you're just like, oh my God, this is it. This is it. This is like what I have been suspecting all my life, but didn't know that's what it was.
Oh my God, yeah. Oh, yes. I remember as well when the second I learnt about it was from Alexandra Pope in her World Power workshop, and my whole life just like I was like, whoa, it's okay. Oh,
Yeah.
but yeah, so hormones, like I feel like that it's so frustrating because it's like, why aren't we taught about our hormones at a young age? It would just be so helpful, would it not be? Not only that you talked about like the map of your cycle, but then also to be taught about your hormones as well and have a relationship with them. And you know, I found that I've, done different courses, and they might say, like, oh, if you have an imbalance with your thyroid or your progesterone or your estrogen, and then each time I'd be like, but how would I know which one that was? I just know that I feel a bit off, or I know that at this part of my cycle I feel like really angry or whatever. So can you give us can you demystify hormones for us?
Yeah, I think this is a really valid question, because it's very hard to know how these hormones manifest in our bodies for us. We just experience, for example, like the mood swings, or the elation at ovulation and things like that. And it is hard. And, before I dive into like demystifying hormones, what I will say is that everyone has a different experience. So this may not necessarily be your experience, but for the most part, I suppose the queen of all the reproductive hormones is estrogen. And Maisie Hill, who wrote Period Power, calls estrogen the Beyonce hormone. So like sassy, out there, full of energy, very people pleasing, very yes, 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 all of this. Those mornings when you wake up and you're like, yeah, and you're just like, you just feel good in your own skin. And the thing is, it's like that's what society like really values. So when we're not in that estrogen rich phase, we can feel a bit crappy about ourselves. But for the most part, estrogen, it makes us feel like that. It's involved in so many different sort of reactions in the body, and behind so many different sort of symptoms, etc. So we always want the right balance, right? Too little, that's not great. Too much, basically. But I mean, estrogen does everything from obviously helping us to ovulate, which is linked to our fertility, to making our skin look plump, and glowing. And you may have noticed those mornings you look in the mirror and you're like, I don't even need to wear cream today. I don't even need to wear makeup, like but also estrogen is important for bones, like that's why when we get older, there's a real concern around osteoporosis. And honestly, the more you look into what estrogen done, it blows your mind, because it does so much. But obviously it fluctuates throughout the month. So I think the best way for every individual to kind of start learning how that feels is to chart your cycle and see how that feels in the different sort of parts of your cycle. So in general, estrogen is at its highest when we ovulate, which for most people is anything from day 10 to 16, 17, something like that, somewhere around there. See how that feels for you. That's what I would say. How do those days feel? Because that's going to be your real high estrogen days. Equally, the last 3 or 4 days before your period are the days when your estrogen is lowest. How do they feel? What's the difference? And that's quite a nice way of being able to tell. I mean, and another way is to do some kind of testing. You're like, how do I know? So the testing I already talked about that I run with clients is I like to run a test called the Dutch test, which is a dried urine test. Some of you may have heard of it. It's amazing because it's like this whole roadmap and really, really gives you this beautiful insight into your hormones. So that's another way of doing it. You can test and see what's going on at a deeper level. Then moving on to progesterone, which is the second sort of like reproductive hormone. Progesterone is a hormone of pregnancy, so we need it to make our wombs really juicy and ready for that egg to come along, whether you want to have a baby or not. That doesn't matter, like in terms of biology, that's what's happening. But progesterone also has this beautiful calming energy, quite sort of like you want to nest, you want to kind of just like curl up into a blanket, that kind of feel. And quite often what happens is if we don't ovulate properly or we don't ovulate, we won't produce a lot of progesterone. So that leads to that PMS, that kind of maybe not having enough progesterone to keep us calm and to kind of ground us after that estrogen falls. But it's hard, it's really hard to tell. Like, it's such a good question because I only ever really know, like, I do quite a lot of testing on myself. Obviously, I'm a bit of a geek, so I like to see what's happening. And so I only really know how it feels because I'll do a test and I'll be like, oh, look how low my estrogen was. And I remember that day I felt pretty depleted and exhausted. And it's like, huh, so that was the estrogen. Do you see what I mean? So,
Yes,
but what
yes.
I would say is if it doesn't feel 100%, like reach out, you can reach out to me or other practitioners, maybe think about testing, question it, don't just be like put off by there's nothing wrong with you. I don't really even like that. It's wrong, but it could be like a sort of imbalance, right? So those are the two main sex hormones. We can talk about a million and one other ones. So you let me know if you want us to go into some other hormones, but those are the two main ones. And actually, let's talk about testosterone a little bit, because that's the one that a lot of people misunderstand and feel that they think that women don't have testosterone. We do. It's actually a very important hormone. It's a really good driver for motivation, libido, energy, focus, and actually, I see a lot of women with low testosterone these days, and these are women who are saying they're quite tired, they find it difficult to get out of bed, and sometimes that can be misinterpreted as maybe like adrenal tiredness, like the stress hormones are tired, but actually sometimes it's also the testosterone. And in some women, it's very, very elevated. Any woman who has polycystic ovaries will have very high testosterone. That brings it with it its own kind of issues, like acne, hair growing in places you don't want it to, maybe feeling quite aggressive sometimes, quite jumpy, So again, it's always about that sort of balance. So those are the three main reproductive hormones and how they feel, but it's very, very difficult to determine what's making you feel what.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so from a nutritionist point of view, like, how would you guide someone to nutritionally to work with their hormones so that you would have your best chance of being balanced throughout the month?
Yeah. So, I mean, we would first of all start with like foundations, like the foundations of hormone health for nutrition are things like, balancing your blood sugar, making sure you haven't got huge like peaks and troughs of blood sugar. That's like, I mean, I talk about this day in, day out with my clients, with anyone I come across, you've got to do that first. You can get fancy later on, but like this is the basics. The other thing is, are you getting enough protein? Because protein actually is part of what makes up these hormones, these sex hormones. So if you're not giving your hormones the raw material, your body will struggle, and your body will actually prioritize making other hormones like adrenaline, because that keeps you alive, over the sex hormone. So are you eating enough protein? And I feel this is a real issue for quite a few women, because there's this weird messaging that seems to still be there sometimes around bodybuilding and building muscle and getting big. And I think there's a lot more awareness nowadays, but there's still this discomfort with eating quite a lot of protein. Then there's also the plant-based sort of vegan, vegetarian approaches, which, like it's just harder to get all your protein in. It can be done, but there has to be a lot more focus on it. So that's another issue. The other one is, are you getting enough fats, really? Because our hormones communicate through fat. All the cells are made of a fatty layer. So not only are you getting enough fats, are you getting the right fats, like the really good ones? We hear this all the time, but what does that mean? Because sometimes I'm like, do we even know what we're talking about half the time when we say good fats? Because we hear it all the time. And by good fats, what we mean are fats that haven't been highly processed, fats also that are mainly very rich in omega-3.
Mm.
So those are the fats that come from oily fish, like salmon, sardines, mackerel, etc., or that come from things like avocados, walnuts, avocado oil, that flaxseed oil, that kind of stuff. But also, like, are you having a lot of processed foods? And not even processed foods, like if you're getting takeaways, stuff like that, there's a lot of sunflower oil used in these sort of foods, the prepping of these foods, and that will imbalance your fats. So really reviewing your fats is quite important when it comes to hormone health. And then carbs, are you getting enough carbs and the right carbs? Because again, I think there's a real like demonization of carbs. Everybody's like, oh, carbs are the devil and this and that and the other. And they're not. And we really need them for hormone health. They have a lot of B vitamins, they stabilize our moods, and they contribute to a sense of grounding as well. And we don't have to have loads, but are we having enough of them? Or are you having too much of the ultra processed ones? So those are like the basics. I've done it in about 3 or 4 minutes, which I'm quite
I'm obsessed with carbs. I eat so many potatoes. Like I just love them. It just
yeah.
it's like I just need to have potatoes.
Yeah, and it's not. I come across a lot of women who come to me who have been relatively low carb for quite a while, and they're really struggling. They're struggling to sleep because
Mm.
you need carbs to calm the brain down and to kind of, just almost like that nice little carb sleepiness that takes over after a meal. But also there's an amino acid called tryptophan, and tryptophan makes us feel really good, but also converts into serotonin, which is like one of our feel good neurotransmitters, and also melatonin, which is one of our sleep hormone. So, but the thing is, tryptophan can only go into your brain on a little carb shuttle, if that makes sense.
Oh wow, okay. Fascinating. I love it. That's so interesting because sometimes if I can't sleep in the middle of the night, I'll get up and I'll have a snack, and then
Mm.
the snack will put me to sleep.
Right. Yeah,
Exactly. Like I'll have like ghee on like I don't know, like a oat cake or something like that, or
yeah,
olive oil, and then I'm like, okay, I feel like it's brought me down.
yeah. And you're intuitively doing what your body needs. Your body knows it needs that little bit of carb to
Yeah.
calm things down, potentially get a bit of tryptophan into the brain. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It's fascinating. I love this idea. So, like the fats and the carbs, they're like little vehicles to help get the hormones to where they need to be.
Yeah, yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
And
And it
then,
all works in
no,
tandem, right?
yeah, all together, yeah. And then, so the first bit that you said, like the foundational bit of getting your blood sugar sorted, like, so what would be, so someone that doesn't know anything about that, like, what would your advice be?
Yeah, so what I would say is, I mean, I've got a load of list of guidelines in my head, but what I would say is it's actually going back to what we were saying about the proteins, fats, and carbs. It's, every time you have eat anything that's a carbohydrate, that will break down into glucose. That's not bad. We need the glucose. But if you just have it on its own, it releases very quickly, too quickly. But if you have carbohydrates with fats and protein all together, your blood sugar will be much, much, much more stable. I think my biggest piece of advice around blood sugar is how are you starting your day? Really, that makes such a massive difference to the rest of the day. So, one of my favorite things to kind of recommend is a savory breakfast, which some people are a bit like, ooh, and you can build up to it. You could start with a little bit savory, but the reason for this is if you eat savory, you're going to be eating more protein and fat. It's just a natural sort of byproduct of eating savory, and you will be really balancing your blood sugar. So, like omelets.
Mm.
I mean, I basically have my leftover dinner most of the time. It's the easiest
Wow,
thing
okay.
to do.
I love it. And then what do you think about this intermittent fasting? Because like I was listening to a whole talk on it the other day, and she was talking about hormones, and it was the Mindy, I've forgotten her last name, but she
Mindy Pelt. Mhm.
fast like a girl.
Yes.
And it was quite fascinating because I feel like I've had quite a lot of different information, like as in like for your hormone health, you should wake up and eat within 30 minutes and to regulate your hormones. And then I'm hearing from her, wait your however many hours and then
Yeah.
eat in that time. So what's your take on both of those?
So I would say if you suspect that you have any kind of hormone imbalance, or you're very tired, or you're burning the candle at both ends, and you're not in what you would think is your optimal kind of state of health, don't intermittently fast.
Mm-hmm.
You need to do this when your body is in a place that it can handle the fasting. Um, Mindy Pels talks about fasting only at certain points in the cycle. And I like that approach. I don't fully agree with her approach because she recommends fasting during your period. I would not fast on my period. Like,
Yeah,
I just
I
wouldn't.
thought that strange as well. Yeah, 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 yeah.
That was a bit like hardcore for me. But she does recommend the best time for fasting is when we finish our periods and then when we start building and to ovulation. And that kind of makes sense because, that's when estrogen is rising. One other side effect of estrogen is it suppresses appetite. So actually, it's a very easy time to fast. Our bodies are kind of primed to handle fasting a bit better at this point. So I would say if you are thinking of doing it, try it in that window there. I would not fast all month, absolutely not. I would just focus it on that point in the cycle. The other thing is that, a lot of people talk about this idea of a fasting window, how long to fast for. And a lot of the conventional studies are like, 16 hours, don't eat for 16 hours a day, etc. That's too long for women, just too long for us. I always say, and that I'm not just saying it, I've read studies on it and I've followed people who know. I would say anything from 12 to 14 maximum a day is what we can handle hormonally. I do think there's a place for fasting, actually. I think it could be great for some women. It's particularly good for perimenopausal women because when you get to perimenopause, your insulin, your blood sugar starts getting even wonkier, and fasting can be a good way to bring that in. But what I would say is if you're having breakfast and feeling hungry 2 hours later, and if you have to snack all day long, you are not metabolically flexible enough. So that means you cannot get your energy from fats and protein, etc. So work on being able to not eat from breakfast to lunch first
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
dinner before doing these longer fasts. Like build it in really slowly. I think that's what our bodies really appreciate is when we do things very slowly, very gently, with a lot of compassion. But yeah, I think there is a time and place for intermittent fasting, but has to be done to suit our bodies and our cycles.
Mm-hmm. And then do you feel that you wake up 30 and within 30 minutes you should eat, or do you feel like follow the rhythm of your own body?
I don't think we have to do quite 30 minutes. I think generally an hour-ish, hour and a half maximum, that's okay. Absolutely tune into your hunger as well. Like if you're not very hungry, you can wait a while. I would say once it starts getting to the 2 hour mark, it's probably starting to get too late. But also see how you feel, because sometimes there are people who, because of like all the messaging from the diet industry and all of that, we're not eating because we're trying to restrict our eating, but actually by the time those 2 hours are up, we are starving and we're just desperate you will eat anything. So if that's you, then that you're just eating way too late for your body. You might need to eat a bit earlier. And, I've worked with clients who have been intermittently fasting and it hasn't been working for them because they've literally, the minute they break their fast, they just can't stop eating for the rest of the day because it's just not right for their body. So be very sort of truthful, I think, with yourself. And does it work for you? Can you eat a meal and not, inhale it and then be hungry for the rest of the day? If you can fast for a while or not have your breakfast for the first hour and feel okay, then you can probably handle it. Our bodies are amazing at giving us feedback. We just don't listen to them very often.
Totally. Yeah, it's so interesting. So just to recap, to just make sure that we've all understood this. So a way to balance our hormones is to every meal have proteins, fats, and carbs. And those will be the little vehicles to help us get our hormones feeling happy and
Yes. Yeah, perfect summary.
okay, great. I'm like, let me just check I've got all that. I love it. And then, okay, so one of the questions that came in was from a woman that really struggles in her luteal phase. And she was saying, what are the things that I could do to support my hormones when I go into my luteal phase? Because my PMS is like skyrockets and I find it really hard to manage my emotions. Like, what would you suggest?
So, first of all, everything we've already said. So, are you eating this really nice balanced diet all month long? Like that's going to really put you in a great sort of like foundational place. When we get to the luteal phase, like if it's an emotional thing, potentially there's not enough progesterone being produced. So we want to do things to boost progesterone. Obviously, we want to stimulate a healthy ovulation, which means how is your stress? How is life in general? Because if your body's a bit like, your ovulation might not be sort of like a very good one sometimes, or you may not ovulate. It's very common, by the way. Most of us do not ovulate every month. That's a misconception that we ovulate every month. But things that you can do, one of my favorites is vitamin B6. That's amazing for helping. A good quality vitamin B6. And if you're watching and this is you, DM me if you want to, and I'll send you a link to some good ones. It's no problem. And what you can do is you can start taking the B6 from about day 15, 16 of your cycle, one a day for that bottom end, because B6 really, really helps with the production of progesterone. So that's a lovely one. Magnesium, increasing your magnesium rich foods, which tend to be leafy green vegetables, nuts and seeds. You can take a magnesium supplement. I mean, they're so wonderful and they're really soothing and really, really calming. So that would be another great one. Vitamin C helps to make progesterone. So definitely increasing your vitamin C rich foods, which is like basically all fruit and veg, right? More or less. Those are some really good nutrients. So B6, magnesium, and what else did I say? I've just forgotten what I said. And vitamin C. There we go. Those are the three main ones. But also like one of my sort of like favorite things to talk about is, what is the PMS telling you? There's this whole school of thought that PMS is almost like a bit of a compass and a bit of a guide that's trying to nudge you to kind of like highlight spaces in your life that potentially are not serving you. So can you lean into that? And this is not always comfortable, and of course we want to optimize how we feel, but is it trying to tell you something? And if so, what? So maybe journaling a little bit, maybe sitting with it sometimes can be very helpful if we sit with the emotions and really allow them to come, because a lot of this tension comes from wanting to feel amazing all the time. And it's almost like, can we create that space where we just sort of listen to what the body's telling us,
Mm.
and seeing what the lessons are, in terms of the PMS. And I think you'll see there's more and more people talking about this publicly, the PMS as a guide, as a teacher, as a coach, all sorts of things. So I think that's another nice thing to do. By all means, do all the nutritional support, of course, but sometimes it's a little sort of like spotlight on, is it a work colleague? Is it a relationship? Is it a life goal? What are the things that are going on there?
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I love that. She's always going to tell you. This part of the phase is always going to tell you, and if you don't listen this time around, the next time around it's going to come again and again and again.
Exactly. Well, this is the nice thing about journaling, because, if I like to create like an inner autumn list, which is like this phase of the cycle we like to call inner autumn, and I'll have a separate page in my journal, and I'll go there every time, PMS is really raging or there's something coming up, and I'll journal, and then I'll look back at another point in my cycle when I'm a bit more maybe rational, and if it's the same thing coming up again and again and again, it's just like, huh, like.
Oh, I love that. So you have a whole separate page. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then you can like refer back to it easily without having to read through everything.
Yeah, all the mad
All the
scribbles.
mad scribbles. I tried to reread part of my journal last night and I was like, good God, I have no idea what I was saying here. It was just like, I think
Yeah,
I won't bother. I'll just move on.
I know. That's also an important part of the process, to be able to just put everything down, right? But like for the reflective part of the process, it's not so easy.
Totally. And then, so you mentioned about ovulation and that we don't always ovulate every month. And so, for those women that perhaps aren't ovulating and that have been through a lot of stress, like what are the things that you suggest to help with ovulation?
So, really ultimately for the body to ovulate, I mean, the signal to ovulate comes from the brain, and the brain is constantly checking out the environment and going, is this a good environment in which to have a baby? Like
Mhm.
literally.
Mhm.
And is it safe enough to have a baby? So a lot of it, does boil down to the way we're perceiving our environment and our reality and everything. So that's why stress is such a massive one for healthy ovulation, because if your brain is scanning and going, oh no, like this is way too dangerous a situation to bring up a baby, then it just won't trigger that whole cascade that means that we ovulate. So really, like, I suppose thinking about how safe you feel in your environment, in your life, in your relationship, in your career, all of these things are really, really important, really important. And then, like, in terms of nutrition, going back to what we've already said, the basics, like eat those proteins, those fats, those carbs, they all feed a healthy ovulation. They feed your hormones. But then a couple of extra things you can do. One of my favorite ones is if you do eat eggs, eggs are brilliant because they contain B12, which is a really important nutrient for egg production. They contain great levels of fats and protein. So in the couple of, I mean, just eat eggs anywhere, to be honest with you, but even like maybe a couple of days before, have some eggs. That's really, really helpful. The fats as well, the avocados, the olive oils, the walnuts, they're all really, really useful for good ovulation as well. But it's actually not in terms of it's not complicated. It's just nourishing yourself. And when you nourish yourself, you let your body know everything is good, and the body's like, okay, go, we can ovulate.
Beautiful. Oh, so incredible, isn't it? It's very simple actually when you break it down. And I think like these are so important, these conversations, because actually everything that you've just said, you're like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Of course, I'm not going to ovulate if I don't feel safe and if there's a lot of stress. And so, like, look at all of the stress around. What can I take off my plate? What do I need to say no to?
Yeah.
Like, what is it? What needs to be changed as well?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, your hormones will mirror back to you what is going on. Like we said about the PMS, we have all these sort of like little guides in our own bodies, like letting us know this situation isn't optimal for us. And sometimes I think like we can overcomplicate things. They're not that complicated. Honestly, eating for hormone health is not that complicated. And maybe I shouldn't say that because I might be out of a job, but it's not.
No, I don't think you're going to be out of a job at all. I think we all need you. So we've done foods for ovulation and for the luteal phase. So we're not going around in a circle here, but so could you give us also foods that would be good for menstruation and for the follicular phase as well?
Absolutely. So let's start with menstruation. At this time, we're basically shedding a womb lining, and that requires a lot of energy. Our estrogen and progesterone are at their lowest, so we want to kind of support all of that. I would say the first thing is the main mineral that we lose at this time is iron, and we really want to make sure we're replenishing that iron. Of course, we want to eat iron-rich foods all cycle long, but I think there's something very powerful about eating iron-rich foods when you're bleeding, because you're sending this beautiful signal to your body of, I acknowledge what's happening here. I want to nourish you. I want to feed you with what you need to replenish what's happening. So if you do eat meat, a really good like quality organic reds, like a steak or like organic liver, really fabulous. Probably the best quality absorbable iron is in red meat and liver. If you don't, like leafy green vegetables, loads of leafy green veg and a little bit of vitamin C on top, because the vitamin C will help the absorption of that iron. So you can even make yourself some kind of juice or smoothie or something, like loads of spinach, orange juice. That's a great quick little hack to be drinking. Other things, we lose quite a lot of iodine at this time. That's another nutrient that is quite sort of present in like our menstrual blood. We need iodine for our thyroids. Great source of iodine is seaweed. So I like to buy myself just, those seaweed crispy, crunchy
Oh,
things and just sit there like licking that.
yeah.
Or sprinkling some on a soup or whatever you want to be eating at that time. These are really, like, what I love about them is that they're very easy to do as well. You don't want to be overwhelmed during your period. You just want to have a couple of things quick to do, and then you think, oh, I'm doing something here. I think there's something to be said for really eating comforting, nourishing, warming foods at this time. I mean, I don't know many people who love to eat cold, crunchy salads. You might want to, maybe. I don't know. I'm not a fan of them myself
Too
personally.
cold. I'm bleeding. I'm like,
No, I know my husband sometimes will put out a salad when I'm bleeding, and he knows I'm like, ugh, I just push it away. um yeah, so nourishing, warm. You might want to put in this, like there's this whole debate always around soya, right, and estrogen and foods that have like estrogenic properties. This is not a bad time to put them in because our estrogen is so low that we can probably handle them a bit more. So not a bad time to eat like good quality tofu, maybe set edamame beans, these kind of really nice fermented soy products. Quite a nice time to have them as well. Yeah, and I think just really give your body what it needs when you're bleeding. I think this like wrapping up in a blanket kind of feeling that we want at this time. And then with our follicular phase, our inner spring, I think most of us notice that shift, right? When all of a sudden you're like, you're a bit more interested in the world, and you're also like interest in food changes a bit, and you start wanting to eat fresher. All of a sudden you can eat that salad and you're like, yeah, I kind of want a salad.
Yeah.
So bringing in like probably more raw foods digestively, we can handle it a bit more now. Everything's picking up a little bit. So I wouldn't say go just like for everything cold and just smoothies and things like that, but starting to build for more of that kind of pattern. But bearing in mind you're building up for ovulation, so putting in some of these lovely eggs. Olives are a great one at this time as well, that kind of food. The other important thing about this phase is as estrogen starts to rise, we need to make sure that we're also detoxing it properly, because what a huge part of hormone health is the healthy flow of hormones through our body. And then when they've been used, leave the body, basically, mainly through like our bowel movements, but sweat as well. So we really need sort of good mechanisms to be detoxifying the estrogen. So one of the easiest ways to detox estrogen through food are all what we call the brassica vegetables. So like the broccolis, the cauliflowers, all the ones that smell a bit when you boil them, basically, like the Brussels sprouts. You can Google a whole list of them. Broccoli sprouts, the ones that you buy the seeds and you sprout them and then you sprinkle them on whatever you want. They are like powerhouses of estrogen detoxification. They're great to add to salad. So that's the one thing that I do. So to do like a little recap, winter, I make myself like organic liver pate because it's bloody delicious and it's full of iron.
And what kind of liver?
Beef, chicken, whatever you can get hold of. I would say prioritize the organic side of it, because otherwise this liver is going to be laden with chemicals and antibiotics and stuff. So whatever you can get hold of. So yeah, organic pate for my in a winter, my menstruation. Lots and lots and lots of broccoli sprouts spring and summer. Eggs at summertime.
Yeah.
And then all of the carbs in the luteal phase. And sow.
Oh my God, I love it. Oh, this is so useful. Thank you so much. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And then is there anything that you see time and time again, like with your clients, where so many women come with the same issue and it's like something that maybe we haven't spoken about?
I work with a lot of women who want to come off the pill, but they want to come off the pill that there's a fear that the reason they went on the pill, for example, would have been maybe to sort out their skin 20 years ago. There's a fear around the skin issues returning, or there's a fear that their mental health might become unstable. They took the pill and it kind of worked for them, but now, they're at a new stage of their lives, or they've gained a lot more knowledge about the side effects of the pill. So that's something that I see a lot. And I love supporting women with that, because we can really, the fact that you just go to the doctor and say you want to come off a pill and you're not given, not even a leaflet. I mean, the leaflets are rubbish generally, but at least a leaflet, there's nothing. It's just like, yep, just stop. And it's like, really? With nothing, no education around anything. So I do a lot of work with women who want to come off the pill. A lot of women with PMS, we've talked about that already, like just a really wobbly luteal phase. Really, that's something that we do a lot of work on. A lot of women with gut issues, like I do a lot of gut work, the bloating, discomfort, being struggling for years with just like gut stuff going on. Supporting women through perimenopause is another one I do. Menopause as well. I do work with clients who have fibroids like myself, just to manage the symptoms. women with polycystic ovaries, endometriosis. So yeah, I kind of see women from lots and lots of different angles. And also sometimes women just want to know what's going on. So we just do a test, right? And it's like, there you go. At least now you have an idea of what's happening rather than this sort of medical gaslighting that takes place, which is like, nothing wrong with you. See you later. Or take the
Mm,
pill.
mm, totally. God,
Yeah.
yeah. I remember only like a few years ago, I went to the GP and she was like, right, do you want to go on the pill? And I was thinking, why on earth is she saying that to me? Like, I'm clearly a woman that's in like childbearing years that wants to conceive. It's like, why would you? I was like, no, I don't want to go on the pill. What
Mm.
contraception are you using? I was like, I'm not using anything. I'm
Yeah. It's
tracking my cycle.
oh, you must be a witch
No,
for tracking your
exactly.
cycle.
Totally. She was like,
Yeah, it's the problem with that model, and I'm really not denigrating it because it has a time and a place, and there are women who need surgery for their endometriosis or for their cysts or for anything, and that's very important that that option is there for them. But anything else, there's only one solution, which is the pill. Like if you think about everything I've just described, right? How many conditions have I talked about?
totally. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just like pill, 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 pill. It's like, really?
Yeah, it's madness when you actually think about it. Yeah. And even like I remember when, when I first got a boyfriend, I was only 17. And that was the option. I mean, you know, my mum was like, okay, well, we'll just put you on the pill. And I was like, okay. And it wasn't until I was 30 that I thought, I remember it vividly. And I thought, I don't think I should be on the pill. This doesn't feel right. There's something that doesn't feel right.
Mhm.
And then it really frightened my boyfriend. And then he
Mm,
stopped having sex with me because he's worried that I get pregnant. And I was like, well,
brilliant.
this isn't working either. What shall I do? And then I got the copper coil, and that was awful too. It
Mm-hmm.
didn't, that was very disruptive, and for me, I was like, oh god, it even hurts me now talking about it. It feels this foreign body in my connected to my cervix, and I was talking to a friend the other day actually as well, and she had just had the coil, and her moods went completely off, and she was like, I just don't feel like myself.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
quite interesting because we don't really think about this often, but the cervix is directly connected to the heart. So if we're doing something to the cervix, that is going to have an effect on our emotions and our heart
Of
space as
course.
well.
Of course. And what people don't, they seem to think that the pill is almost not the pill, the coil is almost like the benign option. Like if you can't do the pill, do the coil. But like both types of coil will impact our health massively. So the Mirena coil, which actually releases progesterone, that's the hormone. And the thing is, it's releasing a synthetic one, a progestin, which is not the same as the lovely progesterone we produce. It's much stronger and it's much more androgenic, which means it also increases our testosterone and things like that. And it can lead to severe mental health issues, like it's usually the progestins in the pills as well that make us feel really, really off and really not like ourselves at all. And then the other coil, which is the copper coil, which is meant to be like, oh, you'll be fine on that one. Well, actually, copper competes with zinc, like they're two like competing nutrients. So if you end up with potentially copper toxicity, which means that
Mm.
your zinc, which is involved in, I don't know, 400 different reactions in the body, like we're talking about a lot, all of those could potentially be impacted. But not just that, copper increases estrogen production. So if you've already got a lot of estrogen in your body, and probably you do, most of us are what we call estrogen dominant because we live in a world where we're surrounded by plastics and pollution and all of these things like actually have molecules that feel like are like estrogen in the body. So we've got this whole estrogen soup, and then you put in a copper coil, which then increases your own estrogen even more, and you feel absolutely crazy. And yet we are told that these are like, oh yeah, don't worry, and what you said as well, like it's a foreign body
Yeah.
coming into your own body. You've got an immune system that's spending the whole day and night going, what's that? What's that? What's that? And like
Yeah, what's
pushing
that?
things
Trying
out.
to push it out. Exactly. That's exactly how I felt, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of gaslighting around that, clients who've gone to the doctor saying, this doesn't feel right. I'd like to take it out. And doctors actually refusing to take it out, which is just, you know,
Mm.
and clients have to pay £400-500 to go privately to get it taken out. I mean, it's just shocking.
Yeah. When I got mine eventually taken out, they also had loads of trainees. They're like, do you mind if all these trainees come in? So I was like 5 of them. I was getting out. I was like,
Yay.
was quite a long
Um,
time ago now. I wonder, I think nowadays I probably would have been like, actually.
oh, yeah. No, I've been there as well. I had to
These
have
days
some.
now.
It's just not, yeah, when I was in my 20s, I had to have a very small laser procedure just on some of the cells on my cervix. And again, I said yes. And there must have been at least 10 medical students all the way around. And it's the commentary as well, you know what I mean? You're like,
Yes, yeah. I had that procedure done too as well. And it's like actually I've really felt from it that my cervix has needed a lot of healing because it's like the just even the thought of it would make my
yeah,
cervix contract actually.
yeah,
And again, it's like we go through these procedures and don't really think about actually the aftercare that needs to happen afterwards and like the energetic aftercare and like connecting in with your cervix and like seeing what actually needs to be let go of because there's an armor that builds up around that, especially if you have a procedure like that. I really know, like I'm still working through that
yeah,
myself
yeah,
personally.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I know. I think that's the thing. There's no the aftercare piece, right? It's just like get this done and then you can go away and feel right as rain and that's it. And there's nothing in place, no checkup, like how are you doing? You know, nothing, no advice on what to do, I think is really, and then we just sit there thinking that we're going mad because, you know, things aren't quite like we thought they were going to be.
Yeah. So my question is for you, are you going to write
Oh,
a book?
I toy with it. I'm kind of like a bit like, oh, like, but I think there is a need for a really like accessible book on hormones because actually I get asked a lot about this and I do recommend some great books, but I always feel they're at that slightly higher level, which is great, but sometimes you need to know like more of the basics. So yeah, I might do watch this space.
No, I feel like that everything, the way that you've explained it felt really clear, but like really easy to understand and digest and be like, oh, right, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And also it didn't feel overwhelming. And I was like, right, yeah, I can remember eggs, ovulation, warm foods, menstruation, broccoli sprouts.
If I wrote a book, it would be like a tiny pamphlet just with
Yeah,
those.
yeah, yeah, just like the little thing. But so for those of, that are listening that will be like, what are the books? What are the books that you would suggest?
Absolutely, yeah. So my good friend Lenice Brothers wrote one called You Can Have a Better Period. That's great. And that is rammed with information. Really great information. Lenice is fabulous. So I love her book. Elisa Vitti's Woman Code, which is the book that brought me to the whole concept of cyclical living. Love that book. And she wrote a subsequent one called In the Flow, which is almost like a 4-week program to follow if you want to. You don't have to follow it, but it's great to get the inspiration from that as well. You talked about Wild Power. Obviously, that's like a classic, right? Like the classic
The
book.
Bible.
Absolutely. Mine is completely, I need to get a new copy because it's falling apart. Um, I really like one called Period Queen by Lucy Peaches.
Oh, I didn't
Lucy,
know
she writes brilliantly. Lucy's really great at just write more like about the inner seasons, that kind of approach. There's the Period Repair Manual by Lara Bryden. That's very good. And Fix Your Period by Nicole Jardim. If you're looking for a little bit of advice, you know, they're great places to go to realize that actually you might need help and you could start with a few bits and then maybe think about working with someone or even doing some of their courses. They both have courses. Yeah, I say those are really great. Most of them quite practical, some of them a little bit more like ooh in the seasons, but I think it's nice to get a combination of them all.
Oh, it's amazing. Oh, thank you so much. And is there anything else that we haven't spoken about that you feel like that in the hormone realm, like, need to download this information to the women?
Mm. I mean, I would say like just trust your body and trust what it's telling you, really, like no one knows your body like you do, no one. And don't allow yourself to be like ignored or gaslit or anything like that. If you think there's something going up, advocate for yourself and really trust that intuition, and dig deeper and reach out and connect with somebody who might help you, or yeah, just or find a community that, and keep on pushing as well. Don't just stop at the first hurdle, because that happens a lot to many women I work with, but really, really trusting, like I think for me, my turning point was when I knew there wasn't something going on, and I had fibroids, and I knew it. So really, really trust your body, and also trust it to guide you on what to eat and how to move and all of those things. You don't really need experts to tell you half the time what to do. We know, but we're just a bit disconnected from that wisdom.
Yeah, beautiful. That's actually made me feel quite emotional. That it's like actually it's just like come back. It's like just keep coming back home and like letting you just trust yourself. And yeah, and I think like this is so much of the work of the feminine, isn't it? It's like coming back into trust and like really knowing what that feels like.
Yeah,
Keep
yeah,
coming home, keep coming home, and like woo, popping out and then come back
absolutely. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been such a rich and delicious conversation. Can't wait to go and cook some food now as well.
You're so welcome. Such a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you everyone that has been joining us as well.